Hey guys, it's Chelsea from The Financial Diet, and this week's video is brought to you by Skillshare. And today I wanted to talk to you guys about an industry that a lot of you probably know really well, but which surprisingly a lot of people don't. And that's the food service industry. Food service is one of those rare industries where we all come in contact with the people who work in it every day, if not multiple times a day. And yet a lot of us walk around with some serious myths about how that industry works and about the people who work in it. And these myths lead us to treat service workers poorly, to not understand their lives, and to miss out on a lot of ways in which we as a society could get together and make sure that these workers are treated as fairly as those in any other industry. I am someone who has worked an enormous amount of food service jobs in my life. I've been a barista, a hostess, a waiter, I've scooped ice cream at an ice cream shop, I've slung pizzas, I've done basically every kind of food service work you can think of, except for, ironically, the one that tends to pay best, which is bartender. And as someone who has had such enormous experience with food service, I can say that a huge part of that job is learning to deal with people who treat you like total crap with a smile. And although some people are just assholes who sort of enjoy treating people terribly who can't do anything back to them, a lot of the reason that we may not be treating food service workers with the respect that they deserve is because we don't understand the jobs. And so here at TFD, we spoke to food service workers from around the country and did a bit of our own research to talk about 6 of the most pervasive and bullshit food service myths so that we can debunk them. Hopefully this video will help everyone be a little bit nicer to the next food service worker they come in contact with, and if you are someone who works in that industry, it will help you advocate for yourself better and understand your own industry just a little bit more. So without further ado, let's get into these myths and debunk them. Myth number 1, waiting tables is a job for teens and college students. So chances are you've known a young person who's worked in the food service industry, and in fact, about 25% of all Americans got their professional starts working in some kind of food service job. But by this same data, these jobs are not just for young people. In fact, about half of American adults worked in food service sometime in their adult lives. And in fact, 58% of all current food service employees are 25 or older. And while many of these food service workers are enrolled in some kind of education, assuming that they are just working these jobs as a side form of income is a serious misconception. The point is, there is a strong chance that whoever is waiting your table or cleaning up after you or bringing up your food is not some bored kid who's just doing this job to make a little pocket money and couldn't care less about the work. These are people who are committed to their jobs, who are there to earn an adult living, and who should be treated like you would treat any other adult in your day-to-day life. And while we're at it, even if they do happen to be the person who's waiting your table, we shouldn't be treating teens like crap either. And beyond that, this pervasive myth that these jobs are reserved for people who are in high school or college or just figuring out their life allows us to think of these jobs as lesser than, and allows us to feel that they don't deserve to be paid a fair wage because they should just go get a real job. Which brings us to our next myth. Food service jobs aren't real or career jobs. A lot of people assume that anyone who's working front of house in a restaurant is just doing so to make ends meet, that they can't actually like their job or enjoy what it does for them. For an example, we spoke with Veronica, a TFD worker who's worked many different service jobs over the years and has encountered all manner of rude responses to the work that she's doing along these same lines. As she puts it, I've heard everything from insults about my university producing rejects to people asking if I'm a single mom and only waiting tables because I need to sustain a child. I've had people stare at me, mouth agape, when I told them I have a college degree and then still ask me what year I was going to graduate. I've also had customers be really intrusive and ask personal questions like what my life plan was in the next few months if I didn't want to be stuck. I've had family members make comments to other family members that tried to hide the fact that I went to college and worked in the industry, and I've also had negative comments about my degree choice, like she should have done engineering, or if only she knew that film would land her here. The point is, it happens a lot, but I try really hard to not let it get to me. I was making more money than some of my friends in their coveted entry-level white-collar gigs, so that kept me confident. The thing is, you can never know why someone is working any job, and for many people, the food service industry provides better financial opportunities than jobs that are considered career jobs in their own sector. There are also people who just love working food service because of the flexibility and freedom it provides. For some people, working food service jobs means that they get to spend more time with their children, or for others, it allows them to pursue hobbies and passions while making a stable living. But beyond all that, quite frankly, it's none of our business why people are working the jobs they're working. And any job that you're doing is a real job. The entire concept concept of some jobs being worthy and some aren't doesn't just lead us to treat people in the non-real jobs like crap, it also pushes people to take jobs that they may not even want just because they want other people's approval. Trust me when I say that there are plenty of people working office jobs who hate their jobs way more than people in the food service industry. And with 1 in 12 Americans in the private sector working in the food service industry, and that number only growing, these kinds of generalizations about what kind of work this is seriously denigrates millions of Americans. Myth number 3, all servers make a living wage before tips. This is probably one of the most damaging myths when it comes to food service because it leads people to actively financially punish people who serve them. In fact, only 7 states require tipped employees to be paid minimum wage before tips. And while we assume that tips will make up that difference and then some, the minimum wage for tipped employees has actually stagnated for more than 2 decades. As CNBC reports, while the federal minimum wage has been inching up over the last few decades, the federal minimum wage for tipped workers has been frozen at $2.13 since 1996. To put that in context, the standard federal minimum wage is still low, but it has been increased several times since 1996. It was most recently raised to $7.25 in 2009. And technically, all employers are required to ensure that all employees receive the equivalent of minimum wage, but that often does not happen. Also from CNBC, the Department of Labor's Wage and Hours Division found that between 2010 and 2012, more than 80% of the full-service restaurants it investigated had some type of violation. So it's no surprise that while on average about 6% of employees are living in poverty, that number for food service employees is close to 13%. And this is exactly what campaigns like the One Fair Wage campaign are trying to change around the country. And this problem is only compounded by the fact that many servers are not even working one full-time job. In fact, many restaurants go out of their way not to hire full-time servers because they don't want to have to deal with providing benefits. So servers are often left cobbling together multiple part-time jobs and trying to pick up any shift they can to make ends meet. This myth that servers' employers are guaranteeing them a fair wage is actively hurting them. And until these legislative changes are made, unfortunately, customers are often part of the problem because of things like myth number 4. And myth number 4 is that tipping servers 15% is the standard in the US. Now, this is probably going to be the most controversial point, but I have to be honest here and say that I don't care. The truth is that if you ask almost anyone who works in food service what the standard is, they'll tell you that that standard is 20%. And quite frankly, if you're someone who has worked a long time in food service yourself like I have, you're probably on average tipping others closer to 25. And while it's true that yes, standard tipping used to be closer to 15%, when you count in the fact that, as I mentioned before, the national minimum wage for tipped employees has remained stagnant for about 2 decades, that number creeping up closer to 20% only makes sense. As one New York City bartender told us in an interview, I think if you were taught how to tip correctly and you couldn't afford to, you wouldn't go into a restaurant. I think if you think it's okay to go to a restaurant or a bar, order what you want, get the service that comes with it, and then not tip for it, you were taught poorly. And while tipping is technically optional, it is not morally or socially optional. I think you need to budget it in when you're trying to figure out where to go that night. And I know that this kind of discourse gets people riled up because they tend to say, well, it's not my fault that the restaurant doesn't pay their employee correctly. Okay, sure. But then your choices are the following. Either you refuse to go to that restaurant and give it your money until they choose to pay their employees a fair wage. B, you accept to go to that restaurant, not tip or really under tip, and then de facto operate that the server should be punished for their employer's bad move. Or C, work to have these problems dealt with on a legislative level so that shady restaurants are not able to do this to their employees. If you are someone that agrees that it's wrong for restaurants and regulators to allow servers to be paid this way, yet still think you're entitled to go to the restaurant, enjoy your food, and not tip accordingly, you're basically saying that you're okay with being part of that problem. And yes, there are times when service is really subpar. But as someone who used to work in food service, I frankly have always operated that I will still tip them 20% because I want them to be paid a fair wage for the hours that they worked. But if it was really bad, I'll speak to someone about it. Because, and I think this is really important for people to understand, the way that we have currently set up the tipping system in restaurants, it is not really a superfluous thing that you're giving to thank someone for good service. It is an integral part of ensuring that this person is paid a fair wage. Another way of looking at it is thinking of your bill with the base amount of the food cost as covering the food and the service part, around 20%, as paying for the service. Is it fair that this is the way we've set up restaurants? No. Is this the way that restaurants currently operate in this country? Mostly yes. So if you cannot afford to pay for that service, you cannot afford to go to that restaurant. And even if you do have a shitty server that you don't want to be giving money to, keep in mind that tips are not usually even just paying that person. They're also tipping out their bartender, their busboy, etc. So you're not just taking money out of their pocket, you're taking it out of nearly everyone who works at that restaurant. Even dishwashers often take a percentage of the tips in many restaurants. We have set up a situation in which restaurants are able to systematically mistreat their front of house employees. And as a result, we are able to receive food at a lower cost than we would have if they were being paid properly. It's up to us to make up the difference, and the less we think of it as optional, the easier it will be to wrap our minds around the concept and factor it into our budgets. Myth number 5 is that servers should have an encyclopedic knowledge of what happens in the kitchen and that they are able to control what happens in the kitchen. One of the frustrating things about being a server is how often customers will punish you for something that happened in the kitchen, which servers 99% of the time have no control over. As one longtime server and bartender explained to us, it's absolutely a server's job to know any allergens in the dishes, but knowing the step-by-step prep and cook process and every single ingredient involved is asking a bit much, especially if you're not in a very fine dining situation. I think that if your food comes out with something wrong that wasn't a part of your order, meat cooked improperly, eggs too runny for your liking, salad too salty, your server almost certainly had nothing to do with that. And even the food taking a long time is almost always not a server's fault. So while you're allowed to be frustrated, taking it out on a server is not cool, especially not tipping because of it. If it's really egregious, you can ask for a manager and they can address larger restaurant issues. And keep in mind that not everyone working at a restaurant has the same role or knows the same things. For example, asking someone a question about your food who hasn't been the person serving you is likely not going to get you very far. And once again, yes, when you do specifically give your server a request for your dish, it is their responsibility to communicate and ensure it. But it's not their job to run down an encyclopedic list of every ingredient that will appear in your dish if you don't ask for it. So for example, finding out that a sandwich has mustard and you don't like mustard is not something that they should have magically known by themselves and prevented. And when it comes to unreasonable expectations in the food service industry, perhaps none are more pervasive, even by people who work in the food service industry, than number 6. And myth number 6 is that it's advantageous to be a woman in the food service industry. Now, I would like to say, first and foremost here before I even get into this point, that I know very few women who have ever worked in food service and not experienced some form of on-the-job sexual harassment. In many food service situations, it is simply par for the course. I have worked at restaurants and private dining clubs where being inappropriately talked to or touched by male customers was expected to be a baseline part of the job as a woman, and if you weren't okay with it, you really couldn't work there. And I've also experienced near endless inappropriate comments from both the front and back of the house when it comes to the restaurant's own employees. Combine the late nights, often alcohol-fueled socialization, and high-stress environments of a lot of restaurants, and you'll often find yourself with an environment that's not super great for women. But a lot of people, even people in the service industry, will offset this by saying, yeah, sure, it's tough for women, but you guys make more money, usually by getting better tips. But interestingly, that could not be further from the truth. In fact, in 2016, the average male salary for waiters was $19,721, and for waitresses, it was $15,329. And as you may have been able to guess, those numbers break down even further in the benefit of white men. According to a race and gender report by Restaurant Opportunity Centers United, a canvass of 133 fine dining establishments found that 81% of management and 78% of higher-level non-management positions, such as captain, manager, and bartender, are occupied by white workers, a disproportionate amount of these being male. As Veronica, a restaurant veteran, shared with us, during my first few months as a server at one restaurant, I learned from a coworker that some of the other waitstaff thought I wasn't very good at my job and was only receiving money and praise from customers because I was a cute girl. This obviously caused me to feel tremendously inadequate because I really truly wanted to be a good employee. Also, I felt like somehow they were trying to use cute as a stand-in for dumb, which infuriated me. I later learned from conversations with my boss that their assumptions were completely ludicrous, and the reason I received such positive feedback was because I actually talked to our customers and tried really, really hard to make a good impression. The talking never stopped, of course, and as I gained more experience, I started landing the better shifts, aka the money makers, like Saturday lunches. My coworkers then started saying my male boss favored me because of my looks. Never mind that another male employee had also gotten scheduled for these ideal shifts. And Veronica has also been on the receiving end of these same kinds of undermining factors from customers. One time, a middle-aged gentleman assumed I didn't know our menu and requested to be served by my male coworker who was working in a different server section. It was quite funny when he couldn't list some of the allergens in our soups, and I had to chime in like I was his phone-a-friend. The point is that very frequently male customers in food service situations will expect a woman flirting with them to be part of the dining experience. And ironically, if they do engage in friendly conversation with these men, often her own coworkers and managers might perceive that as her trying to get ahead through her feminine wiles. And as if being subjected to unwanted overtures or inappropriate comments at work wasn't bad enough, the idea that we somehow get more money out of this at the end as some kind of reward is also totally false. Just like in many industries, there are distinct benefits to being male and to being white, and those are borne out in the numbers on national averages. And the point of all of this is that the myths that we have around food service workers, the workers that many of us are most likely to come in contact with on a day-to-day basis, are hurting them and are allowing these unfair systems to be perpetuated. The more we understand that these people are an integral part of our day-to-day life and society and deserve to be treated fairly by their employers, the better it will be for all of us. If we work together to change this situation, we can create an environment where these hard workers are not at the whim of customers who might take away their day's wages because their soup was too salty. I can assure you that your server's not crouching behind the bar dousing salt into your soup. Food service jobs are real jobs and should be treated as such. And no matter what industry you're working in, one thing that I am sure you can definitely benefit from is brushing up on some of those skills you've been meaning to sharpen. And there's no better place to do that than with Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with over 20,000 classes in design, business, technology, and more. And premium membership gives you unlimited access to high-quality classes on must-know topics so you can improve your skills, unlock new opportunities, and do the work that you love. Everything from editing your photos better to creating your very own website is at your fingertips. So join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare today with a special offer just for our viewers. Get 2 months of Skillshare for free. To sign up, visit the link in the description, and the first 500 visitors get 2 months of unlimited access to over 20,000 classes for free. Act now for this special offer and start learning today. And as always, guys, thank you for watching, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and to come back every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday for new and awesome videos. Bye!